Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom, Rabbi.
As Reverend Grice said correctly, we have become more like family than two separate communities. This is the third time now that we will march together in the Kingdom Day Parade, and this is now the second year in a row that we have been fortunate enough to welcome the Ward AME family to join us for a Shabbat dinner over the course of the year. And I pray that this is a tradition that continues for many years to come. Amen. Last year, we held our community Shabbat dinner with our Ward family before Thanksgiving. And this year, that plan was set aside because my family and I, we were in New York for one of my childhood friends, his daughter's bat mitzvah. And so we decided to move it to this Shabbat and make it one long Ward Adat Shalom festival of love, beginning tonight, continuing through Sunday, and then the march together on Monday. And I don't think it was an accident that it was moved. This week, in preparing for my remarks tonight, I went to the source. I went to the Torah. And the Torah never disappoints me. The 5 books of Moses, we read them as a community. Each and every week, we read a section, and every Jewish community reads that same exact section no matter where you are in the world. So Jews in Los Angeles and Jews in Jerusalem and Jewish community in Africa and in Europe and in Asia are all reading the same section tomorrow morning, which is the section called Bishalach, which begins with our exodus from slavery. And after reading from the source, I went to a prophetic source. I began watching YouTube clips of Dr. King. And I always get drawn to the same sermon. And it's a sermon he delivered on April 3rd, 1968, where he talks about going to the mountaintop. And I always get drawn to the same point. And I couldn't help but think that perhaps, maybe, just maybe, we were meant to gather together today, this evening, on this Shabbat, where we read and celebrate our Exodus in the name, in the memory, in the legacy of the great Dr. King. And in some way, we're paying homage to the words that he spoke that evening when he recalled Moses and the Exodus from Egypt. I had to print out the words because no summary does justice to his words. You know, if I were standing at the beginning of time with the possibility of taking a kind of general and panoramic view of the whole of human history up to now, and the Almighty said to me, Martin Luther King, which age would you like to live in? I would take my mental flight by Egypt, and I would watch God's children in their magnificent trek from the dark dungeons of Egypt through, or rather across the Red Sea, through the wilderness on toward the Promised Land. And in spite of its magnificence, I wouldn't stop there. And it's exactly at that moment, usually, that I begin to cry. And it's because this is our family story. Tomorrow when we sing the Song of the Sea, and we hear about Miriam and the timbrels and the celebration of freedom, those were my grandparents and their grandparents before them. And when I say our grandparents, I don't only mean mine. I mean all of ours and their generations before, singing with the timbrels, with our wives and our daughters, hoping that times will change. When I'm here tomorrow morning, I know that I will have colleagues and friends who are out marching out there. And I know that this is a moment of change, not only for this country, for our communities, for our peoples. And the reason why I'm not anxious is because it's always been a time of change. It's never not been a time of change. And when we think that it's not a time of change, that's when we're deluding ourselves. That's when we're fooling ourselves into thinking that this is the best that we're ever going to have it. And what the Torah comes to teach us is that the journey is never over. But I started to think to myself, if Dr. King attended our Shabbat dinner tonight, how much of this would he recognize when he walks out to the corner of Westwood and National Boulevard? If we told Dr. King in 1968 that each of us would walk around with more computing power in my pocket than the entire federal government had in 1968, and all of us would use all of the memory on our phones to take pictures of ourselves, what would he say? You know, I once heard my teacher, Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson, say that the pasuk, the sentence in the Torah, the beginning of chapter 9 of Exodus is, Shlach et ami v'ya'avduni. God commands Moses to speak these words to Pharaoh, let my people go. And all of us know those words, except there's another Hebrew word in the sentence that we don't teach our children. Shlach et ami, that is, let my people go. V'ya'avduni is so that they will serve me. And for so many of us today, freedom is the freedom to be you and me. And when I read the Torah, I don't understand that to be freedom at all. That's a form of slavery. The form of slavery to walk around and think that I should be taking pictures of myself instead of looking around at the world and seeing what I should be doing to make it better for others. The form of slavery that I need more phone power, right, instead of giving more charity. The lines at the Apple Store in Century City or in Santa Monica or wherever we go, the Grove, are much longer than the lines to get into church or to synagogue. And when we talk about the values of slavery and to whom we are enslaved and to what value system we are trying to stay loyal, we forget about the word v'ya'avduni. Our freedom from tyranny is to serve a greater purpose. And that is how we know that when Dr. King was sitting in prison, he didn't do anything wrong, because he was serving a greater purpose. That's how we know that when my children ask, well, why did Rosa Parks get arrested? My wife and I say, for doing the right thing. And it's as children that they have to realize that sometimes our law and the right thing, or divine law, doesn't exactly match. But the Torah pushes us, the Bible pushes us to reach a day when it does, to reach a day when all people realize who is the authority that we should be following. He closes his sermon with these words: like anybody, I'd like to live a long life, but I'm not concerned about that right now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. He was murdered the next day. And his words and his life live on forever. Not as an inspiration to the black community, but rather as an inspiration to humanity. He spoke to the best of all of us. And on nights like tonight, I'd like to think that it's possible that Dr. King was sitting in the room with all of us having dinner. And he looked around and he thought that maybe we're just a little bit closer than we were when he gave that speech. And I'd like to think that maybe he knows that we'll be a little bit closer next year when all of us gather together in the social hall again. And a little bit closer the year after that and a year after that. And if we do that, if we live our lives according to that trajectory, then we will have fulfilled the mitzvah, the commandment of v'ya'avduni. Our freedom is contingent on service to God, on looking around and asking our fellow, what can I do for you? On turning our phone around and capturing images and beauty in the world around us. All of us know what we look like too well. In 2019, it's time that we get to know our neighbors. Welcome to our community. We're so happy to have you here. Shabbat Shalom.